Oh man, Mason,
Uh,
you good, buddy? I haven't seen you in a little bit.
no, dude, I've been working on this PC. It's just too sick. I feel awful.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so here's the system, and all of this was bought used. Only spent about $150. Now, you may be able to find better deals somewhere. You may find worse. Your mileage may vary, alright? This is all vary depending on your area or where you're looking and the time that you're looking at. So you can see, this is sitting on a test bench. I had this lying around. I am saying that this is $20. I mean, I spent about $20 on it, and you can definitely find a used case for $20 if you'd rather use that. Now, the thing dangling around, because this mounts on the bottom and you wouldn't be able to see it, is the SSD. This is an SK Hynix 256 gigabyte SSD. I picked this up for about $15. Now, a great way to save money when buying used is buying in bundles. I got a 6300 6-core AMD CPU, an Asus M5A97 LE Revision 2 motherboard, and 8 gigs of Corsair Vengeance 1600 MHz RAM, all for $40. The main powerhouse of this build, though, is the graphics card, which is the MSI 280X, which I got for around $55. And the literal powerhouse of the system is the EVGA 750 BQ, which I technically spent more than $20 on because I was going to use it for a different build, but that's a whole different thing. Anyway, the point being is you can definitely find a used $20 power supply that'll go into this system and work totally fine. I think my last build, I actually got a new power supply for really close to that price. So all this stuff is cheap and old and used, so what does that mean for performance? If you're new to looking at old parts, then I think you're going to be pretty pleasantly surprised. So here's an older title, the first of the Tomb Raider reboot games. This is running at Ultra minus the NVIDIA hair effect. Since we're using an AMD card, I figured I'd turn that off. And we got an average of 108 frames per second at 1080p. Now, indie games are a really big category of games that are going to run great on this. All the tests from now on also, and even the Tomb Raider one, was at 1080p and going to be at 1080p and at the maximum settings. So I'm just going to go ahead and quit mentioning that from now on. So Risk of Rain 2 followed those specs, of course, and it had an average of 98 FPS, which this is an indie game that's still getting updated, which is really nice that it can play modern games just like that. Of course, you could probably guess, older AAA games and indie games are probably going to run well, but what about some Battle Royale games? Those are all the rage right now. So I'm really rusty at Fortnite. I don't really play it, so try not to cringe in my gameplay, but this ran at about 62 frames per second. Now, Apex Legends was a weird game to run. It looks great, it runs totally fine. And at max settings, I had to turn down one setting, and that's spot shadow detail, I believe is what it was. Now, it didn't really impact performance much in game. It took, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 FPS off or something like that. But in menus, it made it run just horrible stuttering, and like literally sometimes I'd try to load in and I could not pick a character because it moved so slow, like 2 FPS, just freezing. Really weird, I don't know why. Anyway, once I turned that off, we did end up getting an average of about 59 frames per second though, so ran great other than that. And then last but not least for Battle Royales, PUBG on Ultra averaged about 48 FPS. Now, I didn't test every map a ton, so I don't know how much that'll vary, but that's what I ended up getting. Next up, I have Modern Warfare Beta running maxed out. We're getting about 44 frames per second. And another really new game, Gears of War 5. Max settings, 1080p, running about 34 frames per second. All of these games are at max settings so that you can drop them and get even more frames per second. So hopefully these numbers are kind of close to a worst case scenario. So if you want to play Gears of War 5 at 60 frames at 1080p, you absolutely can with some tweaking. They actually have some really good settings to be able to adjust the resolution and settings on the fly while you're playing, which is really cool. And last but not least, can it run Crysis? And of course it can. Now, Crysis is an older game, but it still looks great and requires some horsepower. obviously it's probably not as optimized as it could be too, so it takes a little bit to run. Maxed out, we got an average of about 50 frames per second. And that's everything I tested. $150. I didn't include in comparison shots because this is like almost the bare minimum you could pay for a good PC. And you get a crazy amount of performance for the dollar.